Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today to talk about creating our stewardship plan. My name is Kiara Frechette. I'm the Nonprofit Programs Director here at Spur Local. I'm going to give people about one more minute to grab their coffee, maybe a last sip of water before they sit down for this webinar. Just some quick housekeeping here. As you log in today, we will be sharing out today's slides as well as a recording of the session, and that'll go out in the post-session eval email. So once you take that eval, you get all the resources I mentioned here. As you can see here on GoToWebinar, there's an option to ask questions. Looks like a chat box with a question mark inside. If you have any questions at any point, feel free to go ahead and put them in the question box. And then finally, I will be attaching here in just a second as I upload it, a stewardship matrix that I will be referencing today during today's webinar. You're welcome to download that. Again, we will be sharing that out in the follow-up, and how you can access that once I upload it, and I'll let you know in just a second here. It just looks like a document icon with a little paper clip next to it. So I'm going to go ahead and upload that now, and you should see one of the resources, the stewardship matrix, being uploaded there. If you have trouble downloading it, no problem. Again, we'll be sharing it out in the follow-up, and I'll be sharing it on one of the slides. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to anyone who just joined us. Again, my name is Kiara Frechette. I'm the Nonprofit Programs Director here at Spur Local. And today we're going to be talking about creating a creative and different, spending some time really creating our stewardship plan. Again, if you have any questions at any point, there is a question box on GoToWebinar. You're welcome to submit questions at any point. I'll also try to leave time at the end for any questions that folks have. And then I also mentioned for folks who are already on this call a little bit earlier, I did drop into the materials portion of GoToWebinar a stewardship matrix worksheet that I'll be referencing. And you can just access that by clicking the icon that looks like a document with a paperclip. And we'll be sending it out all in the follow-up. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started again. Today, we're gonna be talking about stewardship, and this feels like the right time of year to be talking about it, especially as Giving Tuesday is fast approaching, and we're shifting into that end of year mode. So really taking some time here at the beginning of November to really define and spend some time creating what does that stewardship plan look like. And when we think about being creative, when we think about being different, when we're using those terms, we're really thinking about one, how do we meet our donors where they are? How do we build those authentic relationships? And differentiate how we're spending our time, because as small teams we can't be thanking and stewarding every donor the exact same way. So how are we creating some difference between levels of the way that we are doing this for different folks? How are we building these relationships authentically? And then also, how are we being creative, or maybe trying something different this year, or something that we've seen or received ourselves as donors of other organizations? So what I'll be talking about today as we go through kind of creating our stewardship plan, kind of taking one step back from the actual stewardship and defining what our plan is going to look like for the next few months. I'm going to be talking about one, stewardship as a whole group. How are you stewarding your donors, again, as a group, and then also as individual donors, especially as we get to, really involved or major donors, we can really customize, be a little more creative with our actions a bit more. So I'll be focusing kind of both on that individual side and then also on the group side. So the first thing that I just want to share here, as we get into things, is just tip one is to rise above the thank you noise. We do have a whole webinar that we do in December specifically on thank yous. But tip here is really to be thinking about how do we rise above the non-personal thank you, that template thank you that isn't personalized in any way. And stewardship and cultivation are really us building relationships and making authentic connections. And so really just thinking about how can we look at our thank you notes as that way of creating that authentic connection. So as we are, doing this, of course, we can still have that template. Maybe we're using a mail merge, right? And we have, we're able to, at the least, we're putting in our donors' names into a mail merge email. But you want to be as authentic as we can, especially if we're thinking about our major donors and maybe those more personalized communications that we're sending out. We want our language to feel emotive and personal. As you're thinking about this too, to stand out, especially if you're thinking about not only that thank you, but maybe you're having a stewardship with folks. You've already thanked them. There's really room for getting feedback. So asking opinion when thanking donors, and a lot of times we hear that donors really feel like their opinion's respected, that they feel like they are a part of the team, that they really feel like they can make a difference when we can have, access to their expertise in whatever field, that their experience is in. So thinking about how can we maybe get their feedback as we're thanking them, as we're having these meetings. And then as we think about this too, kind of, again, we're thinking about not just our standard thank you, we're thinking about that initial thoughts on stewardship here. One is just, another piece here is just to be unique. You don't want to use the same story or letter repeatedly. You want to make at least some changes so that it feels new or custom. And when we think about this, changing up your thank you letter maybe quarterly, so that those folks who maybe donate multiple times a year but may miss any kind of filtering you're doing for recurring donors because maybe they're not a recurring donor but they gave multiple times, then maybe they're not getting the same thank you that you've sent out. So you're checking in on that quarterly, if not monthly, just having a testimonial that you're going to plan for the year, plan for the rest of the year, how you're going to thank people and tie it to specific things that are happening for your organization. Especially as we think about end of year, there are things that your donors helped to move forward this year specifically. Maybe there was a specific campaign for a program or an initiative, just writing out that thank you to tie back to that. If there is a metric or a history kind of milestone point that you reached this year, and you can and your donors were a part of that, making sure that you're putting that in to feel authentic, that every time the donor is thanked, every time that they are contributing to your organization, they're hearing a little bit more about what the organization's done as a result of the support of donors. So just thinking about this, of course, you probably have that thank you letter. You probably feel really good about that thank you letter, but if there is room to be a little bit more authentic, being more personalized, and I'll get into that too a little bit later, as well as, again, we have a full webinar specifically on thank yous. If there's room to get feedback, though, I would say this tends to work best in conversation versus kind of in that email or in a letter that you're sending. And then just thinking about the uniqueness and kind of way that you're varying up your thank yous throughout the year really helps to have our own thank you, our own initial kind of what we think of as traditional stewardship, kind of set us apart from other organizations here. So the next piece here is that, as we are thinking about the thank you and as we're thinking about our stewardship, of course, cultivation, stewardship, it's all about building relationships. And again, to a different extent, when we're cultivating a full group, we're keeping them aware, we're getting them involved. But when we think about individuals, it's a little bit easier for us to personalize again. But really, one tip here we have is just to keep in mind donors' feelings. So as we think about this, just thinking about when we thank people, when we are building that relationship, as we are planning for the next few months of exactly what actions we're going to take, how will we thank people? What do we have to do, right? Do we have to update that letter? Do we have to set up meetings? Find those testimonials, collect the testimonials. When we're planning this all out, important to also think about what we know helps to build relationships, especially in the donor and nonprofit space. So as we're thinking about this, there's kind of three main things I like to highlight. One is that sense of impact. Two is that sense of connection. And three, sense of appreciation. So as you're having conversations, as you're crafting those emails, again, it needs to come from that place of authenticity. We want to be genuinely building relationships with people who care about our work. But thinking about how are we showing efficacy and how donor has made a direct impact. So are we including a call out in a letter or in our conversation? Are we talking about specific impact that donor's made, or that donors have made for the organization? If we're able to share, longer term results about who they funded, who they've helped, people like to know what they've contributed to. So how are we noting this? Thinking about that sense of connection, so making it personally meaningful. As you're having conversation, this ties again a little bit more to that major donor side of things. If you have those, or if you're kind of stewarding individual folks, just making notes of personal details you hear in conversations with donors. People really appreciate the fact that they were heard, makes them feel important, which is for donors, right, is important here. So just thinking about how do we create those senses of connection. If we're thinking about this in terms of a larger group, maybe this is you segment out your list of people that you are thinking at the end of year, or kind of stewarding, getting them excited for what's to come. And we have a list that is specific to an event we hosted. So maybe we're referencing, seeing them at an event. So it's not, the thank you we're doing for that event. It's maybe a couple months later, we're now continuing to steward them for end of year giving, maybe Giving Tuesday, whatever that might be at your organization, whatever you're focusing on. And maybe we're referencing the event to a segment of our donors. So we're referencing that. Of course, maybe there's a group of donors that have school-age children that we know about. Maybe, we're sending them a separate email at the beginning of the school year just to check in, see how they're doing. We have a group we can segment. We'll still have to personalize a little bit and do some individual, but you might have a full group that you can send a kind of similar email of, hey, hope things are going well. The school year's off to a good start. Here's what we're doing, in the schools too, like making it relevant to them, knowing that they might have school-age children. So as you're able to do that, of course, on your end as a nonprofit, you want to make this easy for yourself. If there are any clear segments, kind of creating those groups, but of course there's going to be some room and need for individualization there. And then finally, just creating sense of appreciation, again, in those meetings or in emails, thinking about how do we create the feeling that donors are part of our organization and team, so that they feel that level of commitment that we feel if we're part of, as part of staff or our organization. So how do we create that feeling that they are part of our group? Again, then they might have that higher commitment to us. They feel included, and they want to continue to be a part of the community and support the community. So just thinking of our donors as change agents, members of the team. I've seen so many of everyone's thank you letters kind of coming through, different stewardship cultivation style emails going out this week and kind of this season. And I think this is something that we do really well, is that appreciation and feeling like we're part of that larger or that local community. And I think we have, a unique sense as small local nonprofits to be able to share that connection to community, connection to, we are building what we want to see here. So those are just kind of, again, about the thank yous, what we're prioritizing being authentic, giving feedback, or giving space for kind of that two-way conversation and feedback. We're trying to personalize as much as we can by thinking about that impact, connection, appreciation. Another piece of, as we craft our stewardship plan and put together what we need to do for end of year, is really just thinking about the type of thank yous and kind of actions that we could be taking. So this slide just breaks down the ways and platforms that we can use to thank donors, including kind of paper, electronic, both of those, in person, and just kind of private and public actions, as well as active and passive. And where you really fall here kind of just depends on where your team's capacity is and where your own capacity is. That's one part of it. The other part, right, is that's the active passive piece. The other part is, what do our donors want? So on the private side of things, active is us setting up those phone or video calls with people to thank them, to hear, what's coming up for end of year, updating them on what's happening to our organization. This includes, those donor meetings that we're doing this time of year, individual meetings, coffees, lunches. Passive is, sending an email or a letter, maybe a welcome package to being a donor with us. If this is the first time that someone's donating to us, that package, right, could just be a postcard, thanks for donating for the first time, maybe a sticker, something small. But as we're thinking about this, passive here is we're able to do that in a batch. It's set out, we're not spending active time, having those conversations. Sometimes those passive are a little bit more able for us to do for a group rather than individuals. On the public side of things, of course, you want to make sure that people want to be publicly thanked. If you are thanking them in a public way, active is hosting a stewardship event just for donors, maybe recognizing them at an event. Could also be that you're doing, a stewardship event. Could be, a stewardship appreciation breakfast. Could also be that you're maybe organizing a call with your donors to talk about your annual report this year, to release to them first, make it a little bit exclusive, having something that's more active. You're hosting it, and it's in a public, semi-public space. On the passive side of things, it's thinking about, shout outs on social media, maybe in your newsletter, any other forms of communication you have that are online, highlighting supporters in our annual report. Maybe it's making a thank you video. These are things that we can prep kind of ahead of time. We can put some time into now. We don't have to do it in the moment. We can batch this out. and focus on it. But again, this is just ways to be thinking about, one, what is your team's ability and capacity in terms of, can we do we have time to be really active? And then also, is our donor wanting this? We have some donors here at Spur Local who don't necessarily want those in-person meetings. They just want to be updated, on a certain cadence, hear what's going on, but they're not always looking for those coffees. We also, on the other side, have donors in our network that really like to sit down with our executive director and hear more about what's happening with the organization. They like to do that kind of twice annually. So just knowing your donors, knowing their preferences, and then varying accordingly, kind of depending on, again, capacity and what you're able to do, kind of what makes sense for your organization. These are just some ways to be thinking about this. Calling back to thank you letter, I've talked about this here, but just as we're thinking about, so we're rising above the noise of general thank yous, we're saying, hey, we're personalizing, we see you as a donor, you're important to us. Here's how we're thanking you. Specifically, as we think about this, these are just some tips here on this page, is just really, slide is really about the letter itself. Again, full webinar specifically for thank you letters, but I want to call out kind of 2 slides here around how you can be thinking about this. Again, as we think about the title of this webinar, creative, different, how are we doing something a little bit different? How are we standing out? So as we're thinking about this, some ways to stand out in strengthening your thank you letter. And again, while we're doing this kind of in preparation for end of year, this is really year round. So looking at that block at the bottom of the screen here, kind of those good times to send, I just want to call that out because those are ways to really stand out. So one, if we aren't tracking giving anniversaries or when people's first gift to our organization is, we should start doing that. It's really great. It's something unique to be able to share, with someone and share on their giving anniversary. Hey, 1 year ago you gave to our organization, or, happy 2nd year of contributing to the organization, and just sharing out, saying, hey, we see you as an individual. And it's really important to us for you to be part of our donor community. Again, this is something we could batch out, right? If we have a full group of people who gave in a year, we don't have to do it on the exact day, that would be preferred. Or maybe you could do it by quarter or by month, just writing out those thank yous for a giving anniversary. Hey, one group is for, you gave last year, we'd love to see your support again. Or it's, we see that you've given twice now, want to keep up the tradition. Another thing you can do to kind of stand out with your thank you is send holiday or birthday cards. Again, it just kind of depends on capacity, and then also the information that you collect regarding your donors. Another way to be thinking about this too is this could be, sending that holiday card, could be the birthday card, could also be really for those major donors that we're spending some time, or a certain level donor that we're spending some time doing this for. And then immediately after the gift, this is really important that we are that we're sending those thank yous, obviously, and I think we all do this, is immediately after someone makes a contribution to the organization. Another way you can be thinking about this is like when they've made that second donation to the organization. So it's not necessarily an anniversary, it's just a second time that they're giving. Sending a thank you card when they attended an event, just having specific thank yous go out for that. On the anniversary of that, again, first donation, or maybe if we can't do it every year, it's maybe that 5, 10, 15, 20, right, years of giving. As we're thinking about this, of course, you're thanking them directly, you're sketching the impact. We're not asking at this time. You can offer opportunities for them to stay updated, continue to give in this thank you, but this isn't the time. We are asking at this point. As we think about this, if we can, especially that immediate, we want to be sending within 2 days of receiving that gift or them attending an event, especially a major donor, people who are giving a little bit more to our organization. So if we can do it for everyone, just prepping when we're thinking about our plan, Giving Tuesday is coming up on December 3rd. How can we have something ready for December 5th? Already, sketched out so that we can send it within 2 days of people's gift to our organization. The quicker we're able to do that, the more authentic it feels, the more tied to that action maybe. And I'll get into the next page here in just a minute, but we have about 90 days to form that relationship and solidify ourselves in a donor's mind. So if we're using those kind of 2 days to get in front of them, taking some time now to prep so we're able to do that, always better there. And then again, holidays or birthdays, the holiday season is coming up this year. Of course, we're in November. So as you're thinking about that, are you doing maybe holiday postcards, Happy New Year postcards? Are there ways for individuals at your organization to sign those cards based on relationships, right? Maybe the major donors have all had meetings with your development director, so they're signing it. Maybe you have some major donors who are really involved in your programming. So maybe you're having your program manager, program director sign those holiday postcards that are going out, or writing a little note in the margin. So just thinking about, again, how can we personalize, how can we think about this and kind of use what's happening in the year to our advantage here. If you're an organization that has a specific issue that maybe has a month, mental health awareness month or whatever month relates to your organization, maybe you're sending cards to your donors around that. So just thinking about how can we stay top of mind for people and also be custom there. This is what I was just mentioning. I won't spend too much time here because I also want to make sure we have time for questions. So if you do have any, again, feel free to put them in the chat here. But just thinking about timing, we want to get an initial thank you out and acknowledgement as soon as we can within those 2 days. And this would be different than, like tax receipt that comes out. Someone's doing it online to our organization. And they just get like a thanks for donating. Here's your information. This is like a thank you we are sending them, email. Typically, we're sending that out within 2 days, or our system's automating that. 90 days is how long we have to define how they view us in that relationship. So trying to build that relationship over 90 days. And some ways we think about that is right after their first gift, 2 to 6 weeks after the gift, and then, once more in that range. And then, of course, we have the anniversary, which I just mentioned, just thinking about how glad you are that they're a supporter. So what we really have is, as we're thinking about the stewardship plan, as we think about this year in particular, we're thinking about what do we need to build? Are there different segments that we're creating for our thank yous, for our meetings? How much of this can we batch? What should we be including? And how can we differentiate and then just kind of replicate the same plan next year and put this into place? I will say when we're thinking about this, when we're thinking about that 90 days, another kind of metric not on this slide that I did want to mention is that 3-to-1 ratio. And this is a 3-to-1 ratio of thanks to asks. So for instance, if we send a letter with that tax receipt included, after a donor makes a gift, the next thanks maybe is a card, maybe it's handwritten by a board member. And after that, we maybe are following up with a phone call from us or another member of our team. So we want to make sure that we're kind of thinking 3 times before we're asking again. Again, not always realistic in that if we're doing this for a large group, but if we're thinking about those individual relationships that we are creating, those major donor relationships, we're thinking about that 3-to-1 especially. Tip number 5 here is around building your matrix, and this is what I put into the material section of GoToWebinar. This is just thinking about we can't do everything for everyone. Everything I've mentioned is great, as you're putting together those templates, those tools for your stewardship plan. But ultimately, we cannot be meeting with every single donor of ours as much as we might want to. We aren't able to do a video for every single donor. We may not send a holiday card to all of our donors, maybe with our budget. So just thinking about how do we tailor our stewardship to different levels of giving. So this matrix is something that, is a good guide, probably followed in 80 to 90% of cases, but we want to leave some flexibility for what specific donors may want. You may have a major donor who does not want a meeting. So even on this guide, if you map out, hey, this donor at this certain level gets a meeting, they don't want a meeting, obviously we're not going to have a meeting with them. So just think about how can we be flexible, but kind of have a standard for how we're moving forward and prioritizing our own time. I want to get their feedback when we're thanking people or, checking in, especially around meeting space, inviting them to events, just seeing like, is this interesting to you? Do you enjoy these types of events? Sometimes you might just have a donor who doesn't really care to go to events, but maybe they want those individual coffees, right? So just thinking about how do we get a little bit of feedback there. Again, similar to the beginning, if we're spending some time, or we might also ask them feedback on programming or whatever their area of expertise is, donors really appreciate that. And then finally, you want to be realistic. You don't want to commit a level of resources and time you can't do for stewardship. Something is better than nothing. If we are just sending those emails and that is all we're able to do this year, that is perfectly fine, right? We're thanking our donors, recognizing them, and that works, right? And then maybe next year we're building out a full plan of what does stewardship look like throughout the year. So example here I'll share on this slide is just here is kind of some sample kind of categories, less than 100, 100 to 500, so on and so forth, recurring gifts. And maybe we're checking off and kind of using this as a matrix of everyone gets a thank you letter. And then people who are maybe in that 500 and above, maybe they're getting that personal note from us. Maybe the event invite is 1,000 and above because we need those major donors at the event. That personal call goes to most folks. So just noting how you might be doing this. Of course, you can edit this based on what your organization already does, what you'd be interested in doing. But just wanted to highlight this as a way of just really thinking about how do we differentiate and not try to do everything for everyone. Some things that we've seen too for people as they built this out, they have events all year round. So for event attendees, maybe there's a category for that. We had a theater organization at one point share that people came to the event. They had an event photographer, really informal, took photos as people were walking in against a step and repeat. They ended up putting those all in the cards that they were sending to people to thank them for the event. And that went a long way. Thinking about videos, especially if we're creating any sort of thank you video. I know a lot of organizations do that. We probably can't do that for everyone without it feeling like it is. We definitely can't batch that without it looking like AI or like a weird robot version of ourselves yet. But as we're thinking about videos that we might be creating, we're probably not going to do that for everyone, but maybe it really resonates with our grassroots donors. So maybe we're actually doing that for that less than 100 group, or maybe we're having our more junior staff make those videos. So just kind of thinking about what do people want? How can we build this out? What can we do for different levels here? And then finally, tip 6 here, as we're thinking about creativity, as we're thinking about being a little different or just really differentiating rather the work that we're doing to build these relationships, is just creating some engagement through sharing information. And so something that we've been sharing and hearing that other groups are doing and really find can be a really great tool for building engagement relationships as a group, if you can't always do those individual calls and meetings, is doing some sort of shareholder update. We recommend to kind of make this a smaller event, so 50 donors or less, maybe have multiple calls or meetings if needed, just to give a little bit of a sense of an exclusive invite, a feeling of gratitude on a smaller level, kind of more personalized. You're asking for an RSVP for this, and it's a shorter event, 45 minutes or less, but really can be here's as trusted and important contributors to our organization. We want to spend some time just giving you the updates, letting them know what they should be getting excited for. Keeping it to 3 points, something focused on the recent work you're doing, something maybe focused on the near future, and then 1 point maybe about the team or the organization. You could also be sharing maybe something about clients or community. I know that's 4 things. If you really want to put 4 things, totally fine here. But just keeping it quick, sharing some, maybe that annual report you have, sharing some news on the team, giving that space of, hey, you're a member of our team, our community. Here's, you invest in us. We want to share a little bit more than just what you're going to see in that annual update. We want to give it a little bit more life to what we're sharing with you, or maybe we're going to share something about the team, or we're going to share some new data point that we just collected this year, exclusive to this group first, right? Could have a main speaker, maybe some Q&A, maybe it's a fireside chat, some sort of interview, maybe there's a video with it, but just thinking about how do we create that larger, this is just one tip for doing this kind of en masse rather than those individuals. Of course, as I keep saying, depending on individuals, you may end up wanting to do coffees with certain folks, but if you're trying to do a certain group, see that this can be a really helpful tool, and it's something we're already putting together, this information for end of year or kind of beginning of next year, pulling together the annual report. How can we make that a tool for engagement and for stewardship? All right, I see here we're at 10:29. If you do have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. If there's anything I didn't cover that you want me to cover, happy to stay on a couple minutes here. But just as we're thinking about what to do next, a couple things. One is just mapping out your stewardship matrix, getting prepared, which donors get what stewardship. Thinking about some touch point, if you can, before the giving season. I know it's kind of started here, but is there another touch point that we can create if we already don't have it before making an ask with folks, whether it's just an information, that cultivation, maybe it's an event we're hosting or a volunteer day we're hosting, just giving that certain point before we're making that ask. If we have a plan that relies on a lot of maybe more active stewardship, where maybe we're asking board members or planning for staff to help in the new year as we think about this. As much as we can, let's templatize things, letters, emails, videos. Let's make as much as we can get done ahead of time. It'll save us, maybe we're doing this next summer so that we have it ahead of next year's giving season. So just thinking about the templates and when to create those, updating any pre-existing materials, And then finally, just organizing your stewardship through the rest of this year in January. How will you continue to build these relationships with people who are engaging and supporting our organizations? All right, that is everything I have. Again, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. I'll hang on here for a minute. Otherwise, thank you all. We will be setting the recording and slides after today's session. All right, not seeing any questions. Thanks all.